An entire generation has grown up believing that ignorance is authenticity, and that thinking critically is somehow oppressive. They can't hold a conversation for more than 5 minutes without compulsively checking their phones. Yet they speak with absolute certainty about complex issues that philosophers debated for centuries. They know every viral trend, but have never heard of Socrates. They demand respect without demonstrating merit. They seek admiration without forging character. They feel entitled to everything while contributing nothing. German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who courageously opposed the Nazis, left a devastating observation: stupidity is even more dangerous than evil. His diagnosis fits this generation with surgical precision: arrogant intellectually and lazy morally. And no, this isn't an accidental failure. This is calculated social engineering that has successfully converted citizens with critical thinking capacity into obedient consumers and functional narcissists. Bonhoeffer explained that stupidity isn't the absence of intelligence, but rather the moral decision to refuse using it properly. The education system isn't a failure due to incompetence. It was planned step by step to create exactly what we see today: individuals who can read at a basic level, but are dead in the realm of thought. Bonhoeffer understood that true education must form people capable of analyzing, resisting manipulation, and questioning the established order. Our system does the opposite. And that's not coincidence. That's strategy. Just walk into a modern classroom to see Bonhoeffer's vision of artificial stupidity materialize. Students lined up like products on a factory conveyor belt, repeating fragmented data, only to vomit them onto a standardized test. Any spark of questioning, any attempt to connect ideas independently or think outside the pre-approved script is suffocated, punished, and labeled as distraction or problematic behavior. The intellectual lobotomy isn't abrupt, but it's lethal. At 5 years old, kids ask questions non-stop. They possess voracious curiosity. By 10, they've internalized that there's always an official answer to repeat, that questioning brings trouble, and that thinking independently is dangerous. Between those years, something fundamental dies: the independence of thought. They discover that conformity brings good grades, that originality is penalized, and that repeating what the teacher wants to hear is the key to succeeding in school. The system doesn't want thinkers. It wants efficient repeaters of pre-processed data. The result: a generation that confuses data with wisdom, information with knowledge, and opinion with truth. They handle sophisticated technology but can't analyze simple arguments. They swim through social media like fish but drown in any discussion barring nuance or depth. And worst of all, they've been conditioned to see ignorance as virtue. When faced with their own ignorance on essential topics, they don't feel the shame that should push them to learn. On the contrary, they feel proud of being authentic and declare themselves anti-elitist. Knowledge has come to be seen as arrogance, intellectual curiosity as pretentiousness, and serious study as an absurd waste of time. This structural anti-intellectualism isn't a system failure. It's precisely its central purpose. Bonhoeffer knew this. Truly educated people are difficult to manipulate because they possess the necessary tools to analyze, question, and detect logical inconsistencies. That's why the system prefers to manufacture obedient machine operators who never question the machinery they operate. Modern education doesn't seek to form critical citizens, but perfect consumers, skilled at using products, but ignorant of their functioning or reason for existence. These are exactly the type of individuals Bonhoeffer defined as dangerously stupid. And society's obsession with instant gratification isn't just a trait of modernity. It's a weapon against intellectual development, because Bonhoeffer understood that real wisdom requires time, reflection, and sustained effort, while our culture has transformed those virtues into unnecessary obstacles. 3 seconds for a video to load already feels like unbearable punishment. Dedicating months to studying a topic is seen as wasteful. Reading a complete book before forming an opinion sounds ridiculous. We've traded depth for speed, reflection for immediacy. Today we glorify the shortcut, the life hack mentality that claims to substitute genuine learning. Mediocre gurus promise to teach millennial-old philosophy in 10 minutes. Apps sell 2-minute microcapsules that promise to replace years of disciplined study. Influencers reduce complex existential questions to 30-second motivational slogans. The effect isn't just superficiality, but the dangerous illusion that depth exists where there's barely smoke. We've cultivated the instant expert syndrome. Someone watches a 15-minute video about any subject and believes they're qualified to debate against those who've dedicated decades to rigorous study. What's tragic is we've lost the capacity to tolerate ambiguity, difficulty, and the natural discomfort that comes with truly learning. When we encounter an idea we don't immediately understand, we don't conclude that we must try harder or study better. We conclude that the idea is useless, or that whoever presents it wants to unnecessarily complicate things. This chronic impatience feeds an arrogance inversely proportional to real knowledge. The less they know, the more confidently they speak. The less they study, the more categorical their judgments. And that's the exact definition of the stupidity Bonhoeffer pointed out, not the absence of intelligence, but the refusal to employ it well. The education system feeds this mental laziness by offering executive summaries of everything. No need to read Plato. Just watch a 10-minute video. No need to study history. There are flashy infographics that condense everything. No need to train concentration, because there are digestible versions of any human knowledge. This is how we build a generation that opines about everything but understands nothing. They talk about international politics, economics, philosophy, advanced science, and they do it based on social media fragments, noisy headlines, and collages of disconnected and distorted information. The question is inevitable. How can a complex society sustain itself when its members are no longer capable of thinking calmly, deeply, and rigorously about matters that truly matter? How do we face highly complex problems with citizens accustomed only to easy and immediate solutions? American psychologist Larry Rosen's research showed that the average smartphone user checks their phone 150 times per day. That's every 6 waking minutes. The brain exists in a constant state of interruption. Deep concentration, which is necessary for complex thinking, requires at least 23 minutes of uninterrupted attention, according to Gloria Mark's studies at UC Irvine. Modern humans don't have 23 minutes. They have 6. The consequences are devastating. We're losing the ability to read long texts. A 300-page book seems like an insurmountable challenge. Articles are shortened to 3-minute reads. Even videos now must be quick. Attention is retained for a maximum of 1 minute. The entertainment industry has adapted to degradation. TikToks last seconds. Instagram stories disappear in 24 hours. Tweets are limited by character count. We've built an information environment for people with impaired cerebral cortex function. What's most terrifying isn't that we're losing patience. What's most terrifying is that we're losing understanding of the very concept of patience. The younger generation sincerely believes that if something requires effort and time, it's outdated and unnecessary. Philosophy can be learned in 5 minutes from a video clip. A foreign language mastered through an app in 3 months. Entrepreneurial success achieved in a weekend course. This isn't learning optimization. This is the illusion of knowledge. A new form of illiteracy has emerged. Functional digital illiteracy. People know how to use technology, but don't understand the principles of its operation. They consume information, but can't critically evaluate it. They have access to all human knowledge, but can't distinguish truth from manipulation. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman described 2 modes of thinking, fast and slow. Fast thinking operates on autopilot, instincts, emotions. Slow thinking demands effort, analysis, reflection. Modern culture trains exclusively fast thinking. The result? A generation that reacts but doesn't deliberate. They instantly respond to provocations in comments, but can't formulate coherent argumentation. They get outraged by headlines without reading articles. They share information without checking facts. Their worldview consists of memes, headlines, and emotional flares. Social media achieved what no dictatorship ever could. They eradicated shame as a moral regulator of behavior. Bonhoeffer understood that shame wasn't a negative feeling, but a crucial indicator that prevented destructive acts for both the person and the community. Its elimination was deliberate, calculated, devastating. For centuries, shame functioned as an ethical compass. Feeling it was a sign of having crossed a moral boundary. It was an alarm that kept people within basic parameters of dignity, self-respect, and consideration for others. Today, what would have previously generated embarrassment and immediate correction, the ostentation of ignorance, lack of preparation, absurd exposure of intimacy, intentional rudeness, this is not only accepted, but celebrated and massively monetized. The new digital ecosystem has created a twisted logic where attention is worth more than respect. It doesn't matter if people admire you. The only thing that counts is that they see you and react. This perverse inversion transforms shame into an obstacle for triumph in the virtual sphere. To go viral and convert audience into money, you must renounce dignity. The more willing you are to humiliate yourself, the more authentic you're perceived. The lower you fall, the more relatable you seem. Thus, shame stopped being a healthy break and became an enemy of digital success. The result: a generation that hasn't just lost the capacity to feel shame, but openly despises those who still preserve this moral break. Modesty is now perceived as weakness, humility as insecurity, discretion as hypocrisy. All behavioral values that Bonhoeffer considered indispensable for sustaining a civilized society have been ridiculed and discarded. But careful, this absence of shame didn't bring true freedom, but much deeper slavery to external validation. Without an internal moral compass, people navigate exclusively according to the direction of likes, shares, and comments from complete strangers. Their self-esteem depends entirely on others' approval. What's most serious is they've converted this dependency into identity. Being authentic means exposing everything without filters. Having self-respect means never questioning yourself. Any suggestion of boundaries is interpreted as repression. Sociologist Irving Goffman, in the mid-20th century, described the concept of impression management. He argued that people constantly play roles, controlling how others perceive them. In traditional society, this control aimed at maintaining dignity. In digital society, it aims at maximizing attention. Dignity became an obstacle to monetization. Social media algorithms work by a simple principle. They amplify emotionally charged content. Outrage, shock, disgust generate more interaction than thoughtfulness or wisdom. The system rewards not the quality of thought, but the intensity of reaction. Someone publishes a deep analytical article and gets 100 views. Someone films themselves falling downstairs and gets 1 million views. The lesson is learned quickly. A generation of professional clowns emerged who monetize their own ineptitude. They're not ashamed of ignorance because ignorance brings income. They don't hide flaws because flaws make them real. They don't strive for excellence because excellence is boring and not viral. But the most tragic aspect of this economy is it exploits psychological vulnerability. Teenagers still forming identity see success models around them. These models scream you don't need to study, don't need to work, don't need to develop talents. Just be scandalous, provocative, shameless. Thus the very idea of merit crumbles. Previously, respect was earned through achievements. Now it's bought with inflated metrics. Previously, authority was built through years of work. Now it's obtained with one viral video. Previously, reputation was capital to be protected. Now reputation is a commodity sold to the highest bidder. Philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about the banality of evil. She described how ordinary people commit terrible things simply because everyone around them does so. Today, we observe the banality of degradation. Millions of young people consciously sink to the bottom not through coercion, but through imitation. They see it works and they repeat it. The system leaves no room for shame. Any attempt to establish standards of dignity is attacked as prudishness. Any criticism of self-destructive behavior is branded as judgment. Any expectation of self-respect is accused of elitism. A moral vacuum has been created where the only value became attention and the only sin became being ignored. The absence of objective moral values isn't an accident of modernity. It's precisely its foundation. Bonhoeffer lived in an era when one could debate which values to follow, but there was consensus that a value system must exist. Today, the very idea of universal moral norms is branded as authoritarianism. This fracture begins in childhood. Children are taught that every opinion is valid, that every decision is equally good, that every behavior deserves respect. At first glance it sounds progressive, but it produces adults incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, constructive from destructive. They're deprived of basic tools for moral judgment and thrown into a world where such judgments are indispensable for survival. Without a solid point of reference, it becomes easy prey for any ideology that promises immediate certainty or group belonging. Clinging to the first discourse that makes them feel special and morally superior substitutes the effort of personal criteria. Thus, individual responsibility, the central pillar of Bonhoeffer's thought, is replaced by externalized blame. When something goes wrong, they don't analyze their own decisions. They seek external culprits, and this permanent victim mentality blocks all authentic growth. How do you improve if you never accept your responsibility? How do you strengthen character if failures are always someone else's fault? How do you mature if you expect society to adapt to you instead of you adapting to reality? The result is a generation convinced it has infinite rights, but acknowledges no duties. They want respect without being respectable. They seek admiration without being admirable. They demand success without having cultivated skills. They expect the entire world to adapt to their needs, while they refuse to contribute anything constructive. This twisted perception of rights without responsibilities reflects in every sphere. At work, they expect promotion without demonstrating performance. In relationships, they demand unconditional love without reciprocity. In society, they claim benefits without having contributed. It's essentially a parasitic mentality. Bonhoeffer warned that a community without shared values and without individual responsibility is destined for collapse. And that's exactly what we're witnessing. Institutions wobbling, extreme polarization, collective inability to solve problems because nobody wants to carry their share. Even worse, an active aversion to responsibility has been cultivated. Any insinuation that they must take responsibility for their actions is seen as attack. Any expectation of reciprocity is labeled as toxic. Any performance standard as unfair pressure. This systematic denial of responsibility generates a vicious circle. The less responsible they are, the less competent they become. The less competent, the more dependent on others, and the more dependent, the more resentment they feel toward those they depend on. A perfect formula for social collapse. The economic cost is disastrous. A generation incapable of maintaining attention for a few minutes can perform work requiring real concentration. Those who don't tolerate criticism don't improve their skills. Those who believe effort is optional can't compete in markets demanding excellence. And most seriously, they've developed active rejection of competition. Meritocracy is branded an oppressive system. Excellence is labeled a toxic norm. Any difference based on abilities is denounced as discrimination. How does a society prosper where talent becomes a social problem? The political cost is equally alarming. Democracy needs citizens capable of thinking critically, accepting disagreements, tolerating compromises, and recognizing the legitimacy of opposing positions. But this generation is incapable of doing any of that. They only seek validation of their preconceived opinions and elimination of voices that contradict them. They've adopted a totalitarian mentality. Every different idea must be silenced, every question eliminated, every system that doesn't prioritize them destroyed. This is a frontal collision with democratic pluralism, and the cultural cost may be irreversible. When an entire generation breaks the link with values, traditions, and knowledge that sustains civilization for millennia, that legacy risks disappearing forever. What isn't possessed can't be transmitted. And this generation possesses practically nothing substantial. They despise tradition, consider history irrelevant, and see ancestral wisdom as obsolete. Without connection to the past, they can't build a solid future. Without cultural continuity, society loses identity and direction. Bonhoeffer opposed Nazism because he understood there are values worth more than life itself. But this generation can't even withstand a critical comment on Instagram. How could they preserve civilization's values if they can't even preserve their personal dignity? The final question is existential. Can a society survive when an entire generation is incapable of taking responsibility, feeling necessary shame, tolerating the natural discomfort of growth, or distinguishing competence from incompetence? Bonhoeffer would answer no, and everything we see confirms he was right. History knows many examples of civilizational decline. Rome didn't fall in one night. Byzantium gradually lost territories. The Mughal Empire slowly crumbled. But all these collapses shared one feature. Elites degraded faster than the people. When the ruling class loses competence, the system is doomed. Today we observe a unique phenomenon. It's not the elite degrading. The entire social organism is degrading simultaneously. British historian Arnold Toynbee studied the decline of 26 civilizations. He concluded that civilizations perish from external threats, but from internal loss of vital force. He called this the loss of creative minority, those who generate new ideas and lead society forward. Look at today's youth through this lens. Where is the creative minority? Where are those reading philosophy, studying history, engaging in science not for money, but for knowledge? They exist, but their voices drown in the clamor of influencers and life coaches. The system doesn't create conditions for their growth. On the contrary, it actively demotivates them. A talented mathematician earns less than a girl dancing in a swimsuit on camera. A researcher who dedicated life to science has fewer followers than a guy eating hot peppers on a bet. The signal is clear. Intelligence has no market value. Spectacle does. The economic consequences of this inversion are already palpable. Western countries import engineers from India and China because their own youth chooses marketing and management. Germany faces skilled worker deficits because youth wants to work in offices, not production. America loses technological leadership because its students study gender studies instead of physics. This isn't abstract cultural crisis. This is real economic threat. Political consequences are even more frightening. Democracy presumes citizens capable of making informed choices. But how can someone make informed choices who hasn't read a single political science book, who doesn't know their own country's history, who forms opinions exclusively from social media memes? Populism flourishes precisely because the electorate lost immunity to manipulation. Complex problems demand complex solutions, but the electorate demands simple answers. Politicians who propose balanced programs lose to those promising quick miracles. The system degenerates into theater of the absurd where the best actor wins, not the most competent manager. American historian Arthur Schlesinger warned that nations without historical memory are condemned to repeat mistakes. Modern youth doesn't just not know history, they actively ignore it. The past is perceived as irrelevant. Previous generations' experience is dismissed as outdated. Each generation believes it's the first to discover the world. This break with the past means a break with wisdom. For centuries, humanity accumulated knowledge through mistakes and experience. Now each generation starts from zero, ignoring everything that came before. This isn't progress. This is collective amnesia. But there's a glimmer of hope. History is cyclical. After every period of decadence comes Renaissance. The Renaissance was born from Dark Ages. The Enlightenment arose after religious wars. Perhaps we can hope that the absurdity of the current situation will become so obvious it triggers a counter-movement. The first signs already exist. More and more young people are recognizing the trap they were lured into. They're deleting social media, returning to books, seeking real meaning instead of virtual approval. They understand that true happiness isn't in likes, but in mastery. Not in fame, but in self-respect. Not in follower count, but in character quality. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about eternal recurrence, the idea that history repeats in cycles. Perhaps we're on the threshold of a new cycle. Perhaps the generation that grew up in digital chaos will birth a counter-movement toward depth, meaning, authenticity. Perhaps the absurdity of modernity will become a vaccine against future degradation. But this will only happen if enough people make a conscious choice. If you're watching this video to the end, you're already part of that minority. You didn't settle for a short clip. You didn't get distracted by notifications. You're capable of what most are no longer capable of: attention. The question is for you personally. Are you ready to swim against the current? Do you have enough strength to resist the cultural pressure of mediocrity? Will you find the courage to be competent in a world that celebrates incompetence? Bonhoeffer resisted Nazism, knowing it would cost his life. He wasn't seeking likes. He was seeking truth. That is true maturity. The willingness to pay the price for principles. If this video resonated with you, share it. Not for the algorithm, but for those who can still wake up. Subscribe to the channel if you want more content that's not comfortable but truthful. Because truth has always been uncomfortable, and that's precisely why it has always been valuable.